Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the festival. I have the pleasure and honor of chairing this panel of national competition enforcers from Europe. I'll say a little bit about the format of the session and then very briefly introduce our speakers. I'm going to speak as little as possible to maximize the time that our speakers can speak for, and also I'd like to get questions from the audience at the end of the session as well. So in the interest of having a lively session, we decided to structure this panel as a Q&A session in essence. And I'm going to ask questions to our speakers, and they're going to take, they promised me, only 5 minutes in their responses to answer those questions. And we're going to also rotate the speakers in the order in which they speak so that nobody actually has an unfair market advantage in their answers. For introductions, I'm going to take as little as possible and therefore introduce our speakers only by their current and therefore most recent affiliations, because our speakers really don't need any introduction at all. But if I may start with our speaker joining online, we have, of course, Ms. Cani Fernández, who's the president of the Spanish Competition Authority since 2020. And we have to my left, Ms. Fabienne Siredey-Garnier, who is the vice president at the French Competition Authority since 2018. To my right, we have Lianos, who is, of course, the president of the Hellenic Competition Commission since 2019. And to my furthest right, we have Elisabetta Iossa, who is a commissioner at the Italian Antitrust Authority since February 2022. And in my questions, I'm going to try to get our speakers to tell us a little bit about how they perceive the last few years have gone really as competition enforcers. So take a look back first before we move on to taking a look forward to see what they identify as the main challenges that are facing them in the next few years. And then I'm hoping to talk a little bit about, or get them to talk a little bit about how they perceive this increased trend towards having more regulations within competition law or around competition law. And then if we can have time, which I hope we will, I'd like to ask them about some research opportunities that they see in the future. So my first question, and I'd like to start with Elisabetta, since she's our host and she has the home turf advantage. Elisabetta, could you tell us a little bit about what has occupied your agency the most in the last couple of years?
Just say, thanks. So let me say that I joined the authority 8 months ago. So this was exactly the question I asked when I joined the authority, to have an idea of what they had been involved in. So I think, and my approach was first of all to get some data, because I think the data on the activity is very interesting. So the Italian authority has 2 divisions. One is the Antitrust division and the other one is the Consumer Protection division. So very briefly, some interesting data. On the antitrust, we received last year 1,000 complaints, and we have made 20 decisions, 7 in anti-competitive agreements, 7 abuse of dominance, and 6 phase 2 mergers. We had 123 phase 1 mergers. We have kept inspecting premises of companies even during COVID. So last year we inspected premises of 19 COVID. So our down raid activities have been continuing. Our proceedings last on average 18 months. And I will not talk about fines and so on. In terms of consumer protection, numbers are different. We have 10,000 complaints a year. We analyze each single one. We had about 50 cases, and our proceedings typically last 8 to 9 months. And this is done by an authority with about 200 officers. So there is a level of productivity that is extremely high. So if I look at the cases that we have done, both in antitrust and in consumer protection, I think it might be useful maybe to talk in terms of sectors. Okay, so in Italy, like in France, the situation is a little bit different in Spain. I'm not sure about Greece, but we have the ongoing liberalization process in the energy sector that started in 2007, and we're going still through a transitory phase, which will end in 2024. So we had antitrust cases dealing with previous old incumbents who were vertically integrated and on use of data, improper use of data. Then we had a number of consumer protection cases because our view was that to favor the liberalization process, we had to act on two fronts. First, in order to make sure that there will be no improper behavior by incumbents, but second, also to make sure that consumers will be inclined to switch and to really accommodate the liberalization process. We know from economics and the paper done since many years ago that consumers are reluctant to switch, especially in the electricity sector, because of complexity, and they fear that they may be then overcharged by entrants. So we also had lots of cases towards rogue entrants that were engaged in unfair practices. And we try to intervene by increasing transparency, by sort of increasing information. A similar approach has been done over the years in the telecommunication sector, more recently where the liberalization process started earlier, and the market is now one where we have 3 main operators, but a number of entrants, very active, very low prices compared to the rest of Europe. And we have been involved a lot in monitoring co-investment decisions, making sure that firms would agree on aspects that would increase efficiency, whilst at the same time they will not lead to anti-competitive practices. And of course, we've had a number of cases in the digital sector with the same view, so the Antitrust Authority has been extremely active. We had cases related to self-preferencing. We had cases related to access to the ecosystem. We had cases, we just opened a case related to data portability. And we had, on top of that, cases on abuse of dominance and related to, I said already, maybe access to ecosystems. On top of this, a number of consumer protection cases again, and it's interesting to see that in that front we had some innovative commitments by firms. Sometimes marketplaces have been willing even to take direct responsibilities for products sold by third parties on their network, or to sort of provide white lists of producers which they would, in a sense, guarantee. So we've gone, in a sense, really beyond what the legislation is, in a sense. All this are really done by a small, relatively small, compared to other authorities, number of officers. So it's been extremely interesting to me to see all this work.
Thank you, and that's amazing how much can be done with 200 officers. And how about the Hellenic authority, Ioannis? So that is also a small, well, that is a smaller authority, I suppose, but you have been incredibly...
I would love to have 200 officers, and we only have 84 members of staff, to which around 50 are basically economists and lawyers, so case handlers. In our case, I mean, it was a difficult situation. Already, I would say, before the pandemic, the situation of the authority in 2019 was not ideal. The average age of cases was around 8 years. There were structural issues, no interdisciplinarity, technological backwardness. So we had actually to start a major effort to restructure the authority, and I think we have achieved so far excellent results. So right now, the average age of cases fell from 8 years to 1.5 years. We actually finished 160 old cases in almost 2 years. We have an increase of about 100% for our down raids and investigations, actually in 2021, and also part of 2022, where the competition authority in Europe with most down raids, which it was possible because our staff got freed from all cases. And we have actually an increase of around 75% of the decisions reached by the authority compared to previous years. And so in 2021, we issued 42 decisions instead of the 25 425 decisions on average the last 5 years. So we have actually many antitrust cases. In 2021, we had actually 3 Article 102 cases. In 2002, we already have 2 Article 102 cases and counting. In terms of cartel cases, we had interesting cases in refugee scattering, in private security vigilance services. We have an ongoing investigation which will be completed very soon on banking charges, tugboat services, but also local cartels. For instance, we just published last week a case about a cartel concerning the construction of marble monuments in cemeteries at the island of Lesbos. So kind of a post-mortem consumer welfare standard. And basically, it's actually quite interesting because these are local cartel cases, and I think it's quite important in jurisdictions like in Greece to also bring local cartel cases. We had actually our first digital cases at the HSC, a number of ERPM and EMAP cases, but also our first digital merger with regards to the deal concerning Delivery Hero, where we examine conglomerate effects, and we have been somehow concerned about the use of data from different types of services, and we imposed for the first time a data separation remedy in order to avoid, let's say, exploitative type of effects. And so we have completed as well a number of cases with the use of the tool of settlement. Now, what is also interesting is that we try to combine different types of enforcement. So apart from the infringement cases, for the first time of the Hellenic Competition Commission history, we have used basically all the possibilities that is provided to us by the law. So we have a number of sector inquiries. We finalized a long-standing sector inquiry in the supermarket sector. The results were published in 2021. We actually started, and we have already published the interim reports for 2 sector inquiries, one in fintech and the other one in e-commerce. This is also, again, you know, an investment of the authority in the digital sector. We actually have now sector inquiries in waste management and recycling and private health and insurance, which includes also access to health data, sorry, which is also important. Then we use our new competition tool, I mean, the market investigation reference tool, in 2 market investigation references, one in the press distribution market, and the other one in the construction sector, where we use for the first time common ownership theories of harm. Actually, we are the first competition authority in Europe to rely on common ownership theories of harm, horizontal as well as vertical common ownership. And then we issued our first mapping exercise, because the new law voted in January 2022 provides us a competence for a mapping tool. And we actually started an investigation in March 2022 in the fuel sector, looking to the rockets and feathers problem. It's actually one of the largest investigations ever done by the Greek Competition Authority in the fuel sector. We have more than 500,000 data points. It has never been done before, and we'll be basically finalizing this in the next couple of weeks. So we are with Germany and Austria, the 3 main countries that basically started an investigation concerning the fuel sector in the rockets and feathers basically issue. We also use a lot of warning letters as a way to ensure compliance, in particular for local cartels. And we also actually have in our law a new provision on no action enforcement letters for public interest reasons, in particular sustainability. We published guidelines a few weeks ago on this issue. We created a whistleblower tool, which has been very effective because the leniency policy, unfortunately, Greece hasn't worked so far. While the whistleblower tool has been extremely effective, we have an important use of that tool. And of course, you know, we tried a lot to invest on R&D to promote new thinking. So I think we have been one of the leaders in Europe concerning sustainability issues with the Dutch authority. We'll be launching our sustainability sandbox on October 3rd, which I think is a unique initiative. We have actually done important investments on computational competition law, on ecosystems and new provisions suggested in the Greek law. Unfortunately, did not work at the end, but we'll try again. And also a new provision on invitations to collude and price signaling, which is unique in Europe, and I will discuss maybe a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but I won't ask any of them in the interest of time. Fabienne, could we turn to the French authority, please?
Of course. Thank you. So I will try to summarize an activity that has been particularly sustained over the last 2 years. Remind you, first of all, for those who maybe don't know that the authority is competent in 4 areas: anti-competitive practices, of course, merger control, advisory activity, and lastly, in matters relating to the regulated legal professions, location and number of offices and fees. We are not regulator, we don't have consumer protection. So it will look like a little bit a catalog, but I'm going to fit it anyway, and I will start with the enforcement activity, which has been remarkably high over the last couple of years. This is particularly true in the area of merger control, notably because in 2020, the pandemic may have delayed or discouraged certain transactions, and in 2021, the Autorité issued 272 decisions, which is a record for it. And the statistics of the first half of the year 2022 show a continuation of this trend. From January to June, we had rendered 114 merger control decisions, including, maybe you've heard about it, a decision to move to phase 2 in the TF1-M6 case, and maybe you know that the parties have then withdrawn their planned acquisition, and 1 decision to grant phase 2 clearance, but Conforama. Without, I hope, sounding too boastful, the authority's action has been innovative and pragmatic. For the first time, it has recognized the existence of a market for organic products and cleared, another case, the takeover of Conforama by the But Group without commitment in application for the first time of the failing firm exception. As regards the enforcement activity on the antitrust front, in 2021, 30 contentious decisions were rendered. The financial penalties amounted to about 874 million euro. I remind you, we have a budget of 24 million euro. We have 250 officers, so I think it's quite good. We sanctioned several cartels that had a direct impact on consumer, industrial sandwich cartels, eyewear case, and I must say that our enforcement action is also resolutely directed at addressing practices that affect public resources, and we sanctioned several companies, for example, in the areas of waste collection or sanitary transport for bid reading in the context of public tenders. Of course, we constantly deal with large-scale cases concerning abusive practices in the digital economy, but I think I will talk about it later, so I don't insist on. We intervened also in the energy sector, which is due to its strategic importance. These are the main trends in enforcement, but I turn now to the as important non-enforcement activity, focusing rapidly on 5 areas: advisory capacity, digital, legislative works, sustainability, and compliance. With regard to our advisory capacity, see, for example, without being exhaustive, opinion on fintech, April 2021. We conducted a sector-specific inquiry in the payment sector. We also advised the public authority in the energy sector, and we started to proceed to analyze competition conditions in the cloud computing sector. We also, as I said, remain focused on the digital economy, one of our priority. We create a specific digital economy unit, which scope is quite broad, and we are conducting an in-depth reflection on the most effective way to tailor merger control in the digital economy. So, of course, we are going to talk on the application of Article 22 of the European Merger Regulation. We publicly called for a renewed approach to it, and we are utterly satisfied with the outcome, even I know that this question is a little bit controversial. I get no time, so I end. Pinar is very strict. Maybe we have some question. And I will only give you one last number. Over the last 10 years, according to our internal analysis, we think we have saved the French economy between 17 and 18 billion euros, including fines, and avoided additional cost, which highlights the systemic effect of a rigorous competition policy that we firmly intend to pursue. Thank you.
No, thank you, and I'm sorry for being draconian with the time. Ms. Fernández, could you tell us a little bit about what kept the Spanish authority busy in the last couple of years, please?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to the Lear seminar. It is a pity that I cannot join you in person, but as you can hear from my voice, that was not possible if I wanted to keep you healthy. I'm through a very bad cold. So let me go through the last 2 years. In fact, the 2 years of my mandate at the CNMC. You may know that the CNMC is not only a competition authority, but it is also the regulator for all regulated sectors: telecoms, energy, audiovisual, postal, transport. So it's a large portfolio. Probably my first commitment when I took office was the idea of creating synergies between the regulatory part of the institution and the competition activity. And we've been provided with many chances to do so, in particular in the energy sector. As you can imagine, we've been very vigilant to address, through a competition point of view, those bottlenecks that the regulatory part of the institution was not able to solve. So we've been using, in a very successful way, the tool of the abuse of dominant position, for example, in order to fight natural monopolies like distribution in certain regions, in order to promote the possibility of renewable energy connecting into the grid as fast as possible. That's an example of how the synergies are working. We could also refer to the liberalization of the railway sector in Spain. In these last 2 years, we have now 3 main operators of speed train in Spain. The original incumbent, Renfe, with a low-cost brand as well, Hablo. But we've seen the very successful entry in our market by Ouigo, the French company, and Irio, who is Iossa, is the Italian companies also entering our market. We've been following this process from the regulatory side, opening up the market, and then from a competition point of view, trying to keep vigilant that all those bottlenecks, like for example, absence of maintenance services, absence of sufficient drivers, and these kind of elements were not putting a barrier to the liberalization effectiveness, and that we've done through a combination of competition and regulation. And we are also testing our capabilities of this combined synergy approach to the deployment of 5G. So we've been very busy in trying to see the development of the economy in all sectors from let's say, a more comprehensive point of view. And it is proving very interesting now, for example, in energy, that we are trying to assess from both points of view how to better address the problems that we are facing now. Let's go in concrete, more into detail of what we've done in the competition area. As for antitrust, we've been very active. There is a priority, a clear priority in our agency to tackle cartel activity in the public procurement area. It is an extremely important part of our internal GDP. We have many activities in Spain that are in fact driven by the public procurement sector as well. And we've been always very concerned on trying to fight against bid rigging in this area. In order to do so, already in 2018, we created the Economic Intelligence Unit This unit is a specialist unit that was trying to create our own database in the public procurement sector by accessing different platforms of the state in having the data, raw data that we've been cleaning and keeping and trying to improve so that we are now able to search absolutely everything in those platforms. We are also, our unit has created an algorithm that is able to read absolutely every format, whether the information is structured or non-structured, so that in order to give us access to the losing bids and the losing bidders, which is always the information that we need in order to be able to decipher the patterns. And now it is coming to maturity of age, and it has significantly increased our detection capabilities in this area, in the public procurement bid rigging area, which is also very useful in order to send a clear message for leniency applicants to come forward, because we have ex officio detecting tools that are working. The work of the unit helped us identify sectors that we should target more narrowly. It improves our inspections. We know how to better search in digital terms. And it provides our case handlers as well with very useful insights as regard the impact of anti-competitive practice on markets. We have a trend, we can follow it, we can see what happens afterwards. We can follow as well who are the losing bidders that will be winning in other new bids. I'm really proud of the work that the unit is doing, and this work is also complemented with a new instrument that we put in place in 2021, a special mailbox that was set up. It's a whistleblowing channel that is fully encrypted, so it allows for truly anonymous cooperation. So the whistleblower should fear no retaliation, because we cannot know who is at the other end. We encrypt communication and we are able to follow it. And this has increased significantly citizen collaboration in the detection of anti-competitive practice. Because the unit that is, just 1 minute, because the unit that is dealing with this is also dealing with the economic intelligence unit. We've been able to combine the information. So it's providing us with important hints. Okay, I will leave it here. I fear that my 5 minutes were a little bit stretched, but if you want to know more, we can discuss later.
Thank you very much, and apologies. So having had a look at the past, I'd like to now look at the future, and I'd like our speakers to identify the 3 main challenges that they see that will be upcoming in their enforcement activities in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years. And I'd like to start with you, Fabienne, if that's okay.
Thank you, Pinar. So without pretending to be original and being aware of the difficulty of isolating 3 priorities among the multiplicity of challenges facing our authorities, I written the following 3 topics, trying to be as concrete as possible: effective enforcement in the digital sector, parallel application of competition law and other sectoral regulations, and third, is there a role for competition law in a context of crisis and an inflationary environment. With regard to the first topic, effective enforcement in the digital sector, I mentioned earlier that the authority's strong involvement in the digital field, I don't know if this reassures you or worries you, but we have not intention of taking our foot off the gas, and we will remain resolutely focused on the digital economy. So it will be necessary to continue tailoring our enforcement action to best meet the specific challenges of digital markets, namely, among others, the pace of technological changes in some areas, data collection, sharing and processing, the Internet of Things, the technicity of some of the relevant markets, online advertising, advanced algorithm, artificial intelligence, and new legal questions arising from the specificities of such markets. So to tackle these challenges, we will continue to monitor market developments to enhance our understanding of markets functioning and evolution, continue developing internal technical capacities, and use the full spectrum of procedures and tools at our disposal, some of them having been reinforced by Directive ECN+, interim measures, commitments, settlements, and fines. Topic 2, parallel application of competition law and other sectoral regulations. I will remind you, as I said, that the authority, unlike, for example, the Spanish authority, is not a sectoral regulator. And it is true that the growing complexity of the economy and the high expectations coming from politicians and consumers lead to a growing interaction between sectoral and competition law. It may create synergies, but also tension between distinct sets of legislations, which may sometimes pursue conflicting objectives. Challenges are likely to arise in the digital field, in particular, regarding, for example, the parallel application of DMA and competition law. Data protection and competition issues are often intrinsically linked. See, for example, the ETT case or the German Facebook case, and the incorporation of privacy arguments into the competition law framework and the consideration of privacy as a factor of a competition law analysis are complex subjects. More generally, national competition enforcement constitutes one aspect of a more global institutional ecosystem composed of different sectoral regulators, data protection, media, transport, consumer protection, telecom, and levels of regulation, national but also supranational, with the Commission applying both one articles of the treaty and the DMA. So the Autorité is deeply committed to ensure consistency between these rules. At a national level, we ensure a high level of communication and exchange with other regulators, and there is a specific disposition in the French Commercial Code which says that the Autorité must inform sectoral regulators of all proceedings relating to sectors falling within their areas of expertise. Few final words on the third term. Is there a role for competition law in a context of crisis and inflationary environment? Even though the main causes of the current crisis and inflation are located, of course, elsewhere than in market concentration, and even though competition enforcement is not as such an anti-inflation tool, competition policy may provide some relief in certain circumstances. Indeed, lack of competition in certain markets could increase the inflation. In this context, we could reflect on our potential role to attenuate the effects of such phenomena. Certain companies may be tempted to coordinate in order to take advantage of a windfall effect. There may be bottlenecks. There can be industries where competition could be opened up to lower consumer prices, and some competition law instruments might be particularly adequate in such context. Increasing monitoring of certain markets, sector inquiries, advocacy role, and merger control, accentuated scrutiny regarding acquisitions in already concentrated markets. Here are some tracks. I've been too long, so I give the floor to Cani, I think.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Fernández, can we turn to you?
It's a challenge, indeed.
I'm sorry.
That's the fourth challenge.
I did tell everyone, and it was their point.
Thank you very much. I will try to be brief. From my point of view, I think that the CNMC has three main challenges in the next couple of years. The first one, I fully agree with Fabienne, is exactly the same concern, the functioning of digital markets and its interaction with the DMA. The second is new incentives to leniency programs, because we see the decline everywhere. And finally, and this is very particular for us, is the implementing of our new settlements program, as we don't have one in Spain. In our 21-26 strategic plan, we showed the importance of the digital markets for the CNMC. It was one of our main concerns. It was in the short and the medium term, in the supervision and in the competition area, and also, even if we are not a consumer protection agency, as well for the consumers, which we can reach through our unfair methods of competition. We have an Article 3 similar to the Article 5 of the FTC. Regarding the DMA and its interaction with competition as well, I have already said in different fora that we would like the DMA to have a more delimited approach as an ex-ante tool, a clearer delineation of gatekeepers. Because if it is to be an ex-ante tool, companies have to be very clearly subject to it and knowing ex-ante what is expected from them. A greater enforcement of the coordination mechanism between the DMA and Articles 101 and 102, that has been my second concern that I have repeated in this fora. And then to have a more relevant participation of the NCAs in the DMA. Now we are in the process that we are waiting for the final text. We are waiting to see how the details are going to be drafted, but in parallel, we are inside the ECN already presenting to the European Commission this need of starting with the coordination procedures and relying on the already existing structure that we have in Regulation 1/2003. With respect to leniency programs, I have to say that since its entry into force in Spain in February 2008, the leniency program has been tremendously successful, and it has been very useful in fighting against cartels, facilitating detection and subsequent sanction. But it is true that there is a decline in this. This debate has opened a space and resources for other initiatives. That is why the Economic Intelligence Unit I was mentioning and the whistleblower channel have proved so useful for us and so successful, because we are sending this message that I was mentioning before of ex officio capabilities, which is also an incentive for leniency applicants. Also, we have the possibility under our law to impose fines on managers for their personal involvement in the anti-competitive practice in which their company was involved. And the names of the wrongdoers can be published. It has already been clarified by our Supreme Court. Since 2016, managers have been sanctioned in 14 cartel cases. I would like to remember that under our leniency system, managers can also apply for leniency. So that's another incentive that is working well. We have also additional leniency benefits because there is, as you know, as implementation for a European directive, a procurement ban for those wrongdoers. And leniency provides an exception for the public procurement ban. And this is also working. As you know, we were mentioning the importance of the public procurement chunk of our Spanish economy. Finally, our national competition law is now in the parliamentary amendment process. And hopefully we will be able to deploy a settlement procedure in Spain. We will have the challenge to test it and tailor it to the Spanish system to make it workable. But we are now following the parliamentary process for the modification of our law and crossing our fingers. So these are our main three challenges, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to turn to Elisabetta, please.
Yes, so maybe I'll mention more than three challenges, if it's okay. So very briefly. No, there is a lot happening in the Italian Competition Authority. We are hiring, thanks to ECM Plus, we're raising 10% our personnel. Second, we have just seen approved the law, a new competition law, which has given us a lot of new powers. First, we have now the power to impose fines also before the opening of a case when firms don't supply information or wrong information. Second, and that's a big challenge, we are going to introduce settlement. It's a big challenge for any game theorist to understand how settlement incentives interact with commitment incentives and with incentives to collude and with incentives to apply for leniency. I'm happy that I know there is some research on this, so it will be a challenge on its own. Then we have been new power in the sense that we have already an abuse of economic dominance, kind of Section 19 in Germany, and now there is a presumption of economic dominance on digital platform. this is all happening now. And we have also changed our approach towards concentration, so we can now also look and ask to be notified acquisitions below thresholds. So the whole debate on acquisitions, killer acquisitions and acquisitions of nascent competitors, you know, is going to be relevant for us. And last but not least, we've received, you know, in Italy, a lot of funds from Europe, Next Generation EU and the National Resilience and Recovery Plan. Now, we have always been extremely active on bid rigging. 50% of our cartel cases since 2015 are on bid rigging. The Italian authority has opened most of them ex officio. So we're happy that we have a lot of experience on this, and we've been quite successful in courts. So we're not too worried about the decline in leniency, also because in Italy there seems to be an opposite trend. Maybe this is following the fact that due to the ECM Plus now there is also criminal immunity for immunity applicants. So something, but we need to see, these are really small numbers. And we have already intervened, we have about 100 advocacy cases every year. And many are on tender designs. So clearly with all these funds happening, we're going to support the process of allocating these funds through competitive tendering as is provided by the law. And of course, we have challenges related to the digital sector. We've been very active. In Italy, the government has not yet decided whether they will designate an authority. We think that the Italian authority has the experience in terms of number of digital big cases done, in terms of interaction in DCM Plus. So, and you know, and obviously that could help also, you know, avoid the parallel cases are opened. We have, of course, the challenge of the energy sector, like Greece and France and other countries. We've been asked to monitor it. We have a cartel case opened, but it's not one which will make maybe a difference at national level. But we're monitoring, and of course, with our competencies, we will intervene where necessary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ioannis?
Well, with how things are evolved, it's quite difficult to predict what will happen the next year or two. But let's say that one of the biggest challenges we're going to have is related to the current economic crisis, like the food price hikes, the energy sector. So this is something that we think more cooperation is needed between competition authorities, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So that's definitely one area where we'll focus our enforcement. I would say another issue, another challenge is to how to use our new powers. I mean, we have a new provision, Article 1A, which concerns invitations to collude the price signaling. It's a unique provision in Europe, so it's interesting to see how we will enforce that. We are in the process of preparing guidelines, which will be published in the next few weeks for comments. We have the mapping tool that I mentioned before, and we have also the sustainability type of no-action enforcement letter type of approach, and we have also published guidelines there, and we have now the sustainability sandbox. So I think this is going to be quite interesting to see how this is going to work, and of course, you have to be two to tango, so the industry will have to engage with these new tools, so as obviously for us to see how best we can design them. I think another important challenge is the integration of data science in our enforcement activity. We have been using data science actually in two cases, one in the refugee catering cartel and the other one in the banking charges cartel. So this is really quite interesting area. Actually, it's quite funny because I had taken a guilty pleasure as a lawyer to observe the tensions between the data scientists and the economists. So we thought before between lawyers and economists. Now the new kind of tensions will be between data scientists and economists in terms of how they assess evidence, the standard of proof. So in that context, we have invested a lot. So we created a quite unique data and economic intelligence platform, which observes more than 2,000 products, the prices every day, as well as quantities for some of them. We will now be integrating their bid rigging type of function. I mean, with a public procurement database, we have We have discussions to cooperate with the Danish competition authority, has done quite a lot of work concerning this bid rigging type of screening tools. And I would say that an important challenge is also to take a political economy perspective on building, let's say, competition law institutions. I think we're facing, in a small country like Greece, a quite important institutional challenge with regards to independence, but also with regards to the difficulty we might have to hire experts. In the public sector, we have very low salaries, and as our work has been intensified significantly, I mean, this is quite difficult to find experts to join the authority. So this is why we have invested in creating a supportive ecosystem with consumer associations, SMEs. We signed a number of MOUs with universities and research institutes, and we also actually, and it's part of the plan to help create and incentivize more follow-on damages cases. I think the problem with small jurisdictions is that the defense bar takes more importance than in other jurisdictions, and that obviously shows in GCR type of rankings. So it's important to develop a sort of balance between the plaintiff bar and the defense bar. In particular in Greece, for instance, many of the members of the defense bar are part of the specific competition committee of the Confederation of Industries. They're playing a very important role in the competition, the discussion of competition bills. So for us, it's important to develop actually allies in the plaintiff bar, in consumer associations, SMEs, to bring more balance and to make actually our system more mature from an institutional perspective. And I think another important thing, and this is my last point, is the role of the authority to promote dynamic efficiency and innovation. A lot of our activity has been on opening up economic sectors, which were not necessarily, closed by the state, but actually by incumbents that with close relations with the state. And I think this is what motivated our cases concerning recycling and waste management, as well as the waste management sector inquiry. We also tried to commission studies to show problems in a sort of a naming and shaming type of approach, which I think has been very effective. For instance, we commissioned a study concerning the telecommunication prices, which I think played a very important role for bringing this topic to the center of the discussion, the public discussion, and immediately led also to quite important improvements in terms of consumer benefits with regards to that. And also a little bit our work in the media sector has also tried to somehow concentrate and democratize a little bit more this area. So I think, this political economy perspective, I think, should be there. In particular, if, you're preparing, the competition authority has to play a supportive role in preparing the transition to the digital economy as well as to the green economy. So there's a very important transformation moment that we're having now, and it's important that the institutions we have are competitive, because this is really the time where these industries, actually the new industries of the future, are set. So it's very important, our role here, to introduce more competition. This is more or less our activity so far with regards to the challenges.
Thank you. There are a lot, and it's obvious that it's getting increasingly more challenging to do, the job of an authority in an increasingly complex economy and different sectors, different markets, that sort of the scope of the authority seems to get larger and larger. And one particular question I had was in relation to digital markets, which we have touched upon a little bit, but in Europe in particular, there's an increasing trend towards ex-ante regulation of markets, most notably digital. And I know that some people see, for example, the DMA as a substitute to competition law, but others see it as a complement to competition law. And I was wondering what the authorities, or perhaps what your views are on this, if you like, in your personal capacity. So what do you think of this trend of perhaps carving out parts of the economy and subjecting it to ex-ante regulation, while in principle competition law also continues to apply in these carved out parts of the economy? And I'd like to start with Ms. Fernández, if we haven't lost her.
Many thanks, Pinar. I strongly believe that competition is usually the best mechanism to ensure maximum efficiency and consumer welfare. Regulation can also pursue legitimate goals, such as the correction of market failures, for example, even in liberalized markets, or well, other reasons of general interest. However, regulation should always be the last resort and be applied only when these market failures or bottlenecks cannot be solved by the dynamics of the market. The Google shopping case is a very good example. I mean, it has taken 12 years, since November 2009, when the first complaints were lodged with the European Commission, until the ruling of the General Court in 2021. And it is not yet over, because as you know, there is an appeal before the Court of Justice in case C4822P, so pourvoi. So we will still wait to have a final view on this. And this situation illustrates, in my view, perfectly well the lengthy and complicated process required to apply Article 102 by competition authorities to unfair commercial practices that are performed by gatekeepers. And this is why we know it all, why regulators across the world, and specifically in the European Union, I think we are leaders in that, and I think we should be proud of that, have been calling for additional tools to deal with competitive challenges in the digital arena, because we fear that we are arriving late. And this, the European Union leadership has provided with the DMA, this ex-ante regulation in digital markets. As this audience already is aware of, the DMA will not prevent, as you had said, Pinar, the application of competition law to digital markets. It declares itself complementary to the competition rules and indicates that it aims at protecting a different legal interest from those rules. Therefore, in a post-DMA scenario, both instruments will coexist and remain at the disposal of enforcers to address competition challenges in digital markets, ex-ante instructions to gatekeepers under the DMA, and ex-post enforcement of competition law. This is not new. As a telecom regulator and competition authority, I know very well that we have exactly the same scheme, for example, in the telecom area. And it has provided for access remedies, which I think it is the common element in the situation we are living. So I see that we have this complementarity possibility of action, but in order to warrant certainty for those in the market and in the day-to-day application of the DMA, an efficient interaction between the DMA and the competition rules will depend on three major principles that I already mentioned and I would like to repeat. A clear, predictable scope of the DMA, coordination mechanisms between the DMA and competition law, and reliance of the DMA in the existing institutional architecture for an effective enforcement. Thank you, Pinar.
Thank you. And how about your thoughts on this, Fabienne?
So it's true that if we look back at the debates of the last few years, we can note that the need to define new rules has generally been imposed throughout the world. And on the question of the most appropriate instrument, there was and still is a debate on what to do. Is it enough to reform competition law using new tools perceived to address alleged gaps in the current competition rules? Non-dominant companies with market power, market definition, essential facilities, mergers, length of the procedures, as Cani mentioned, and providing competition authorities with more resources and better digital tools? Or should there be a paradigm shift as the key feature of the digital platform markets exhibit the emblematic characteristics of market failure and justify the adoption of ex-ante regulation? And if so, who should be responsible for enforcing these new rules? The future will tell us which is the better choice, if there is a choice, in terms of efficiency and adequacy, but now we have the DMA, and as we know, this new regulation will hopefully allow for quick intervention in relation to the list of defined obligations and prohibitions under Articles 5 and 6. However, to answer to your interrogation, Pinar, I think that this new instrument should be seen as a complement rather than as a substitute to competition law. The DMA has indeed been specifically designed to complement the regulator's ex post application of competition law, and competition law will still be applicable and relevant, especially with respect to practices that are not and they are already covered by the DMA. In a complex, rapidly evolving and ever-changing markets, new practices will appear and their effects on the market will need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. In this respect, our future enforcement decision will certainly help adapt the DMA. Furthermore, several recent cases demonstrate that competition laws remain highly relevant to deal efficiently with digital players. I'm thinking, for example, of the 2021 News Corp case. We found that Google abused its dominant position in the advertising server market. Google did not dispute the facts, wished to benefit from the settlement procedure, proposed commitments to improve the interoperability with third party, and last but not least, was fined 220 million euros after only, I say only, 18 months of investigation. Another recent striking French decision dealt with Google's behavior in the framework of the directive on the so-called related rights after it was transposed in French law in 2020. It's a kind of a saga because there were 3 steps. First, we have injunction. Then we have 500 million euro fine for non-respect of injunction. And this year, Google accepted commitments. And of course, there is a Meta decision also in the advertising sector where Meta accepted for the first time in the world to engage in commitments. It has also to be noted that the DMA itself provides that DMA will be applied, I quote, without prejudice of the application of European Union and national competition law. Therefore, both texts, both in theory, be applicable to the same practices, and we'll have to find smooth mechanism to ensure strong consistency and very close coordination between both sets of rules. In conclusion, the interplay between competition law and digital regulation, between ex ante and ex post regulation, is, at least at European Union level, one, I think, of the most promising and yet challenging issue for European enforcers, and our success will largely depend on our ability to enforce specific regulation and competition law in a complementary and coordinated manner.
Thank you. I think in theory was the critical phrase there. In theory, they should work as complements.
Yes.
Do you think they will? Or I guess there
Well, I
are
hope
two
so.
questions. One is substantive, are they really complements or substitutes? And the other is, how is it going to work out in process in terms of the procedures, I guess?
I mean, there are 2 readings of what has happened the last few years. One, the first reading is that, which goes a little bit towards the direction of substitute, is that, we have been facing markets which since the early 1990s were largely unregulated, with some sparse competitional enforcement that took also a long time to materialize. So there was this idea that competition enforcement has failed, or at least traditional competition enforcement has failed, and therefore we needed to have this regulatory option. And somehow it's a swinging of the pendulum towards regulation. That's one reading of what actually happened. Obviously, because of the rents that these digital platforms were getting, became a politically sensitive issue that motivated regulation. Another reading, which I will say is a little bit the one that I have, is that really what happened is that we're facing a much more complex economy. You use the term complex economy. I've been using this term also for a few years now, because it's a different thing to produce in the context of a digital, but not only digital, I would say in the context of an ecosystem economy, where modularization becomes a very important part of the way value is created. So the more actually are the institutions that create value become complex, then the regulatory framework should it becomes complex as well. And this is we need to develop this kind of more flexible and fuzzy, I would say, also regulatory framework. These are this is a transformation that is getting that is taking place before our eyes. So one way that explains is the use of alternative competition enforcement tools like settlements, commitments, interim measures. So this is really like one of the ways that this complexity has expressed itself in the competition field. The other one is the development of a very elaborate regulatory framework for the digital economy. And there I will not just put the DMA, which is a little bit a bright line competition regulation, but I will also put the General Data Protection Regulation, the Platform to Business Regulation, the Privacy Directive, the Digital Services Act, the Data Governance Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, the Data Act, the European initiative now concerning the health data space. I will also put PSD2, in terms of the access to data, financial data, etc. So this is really a complex system of substantive rules and institutional structures whose interplay is not yet easy to fully comprehend, because to this we should add the EU competition law approach as well as the national competition law, both traditional and somehow new, like the Article 19A or the provision in Italy, etc. So what actually I think explains what happened is that we are adopting what I've called in some of my publications a toolkit approach. And this is very different, therefore, in terms of how we conceptualize the interaction with competition regulation. Traditionally, competition regulation were considered as two different poles of an interventionist continuum, and they were largely conceptualized as alternatives. Here, because we have this complex economy phenomenon, they are more of a complement, like a toolkit approach. And I think this will require probably some new thinking also about the procedural aspects. I mean, it's not, I think, a hazard that the European Court with the BPOST case raise issues of nebis-in-idem in a different way than in the past, because they understand that, it's a much more complex environment. And therefore, we need to form, this is why the new nebis-in-idem rule now is more about cooperation between competition authorities and the regulator that could be in charge for the sector-specific regulation, the formation of regulatory networks, and a broader regulatory compass. So I would say this is really what the future might be here to make sense of all these important changes.
Thank you. And Elisabetta, the Italian authority already has consumer protection powers, so it already is accustomed to dealing with regulated or other regulations alongside competition. So what do you think about the new, I guess, age of regulation plus competition, including in particular for digital markets?
Yes, so let me say that again, I speak in my personal capacity, and maybe I also put the hat of an economic professor. So in economics, when we, in economic theory, the more instruments you have, the better. And there's been a debate in the past, it started in environmental regulation on when to use ex ante regulation and when to use ex post regulation. And these papers have shown that you need to have a combination of both, because there are things that you can better handle with the former and things you can better handle with the latter. And that, in fact, the combination is the thing that allows you to sort of trade off all the different aspects. Because on the one hand, if you think about in general ex ante regulation, you want to give certainty to firms. They need to know which behavior, is anti-competitive. And if you have identified something that you know that is going to typically damage consumers and competitive process, then you want to forbid it ex ante. Okay, so you avoid lengthy proceeding, even if you're a super fast authority, that anyway will damage the process, competitive process, and create harm to consumers. So the ex ante regulation can handle those objectives, and in that regard, if you can cover those instances where, as I mentioned, you have identified over the years practices that are uncompetitive, then you sort of nail them down. On the other hand, we are in a world where things evolve extremely fast. A digital world evolves every second. And by the time that you have dealt with the practice, then a new practice arises. And therefore, you need to have also the flexibility to intervene. And how do you do that? Through ex-post intervention. So ex-post intervention may give a little bit less certainty to firms, requires an analysis, an economic analysis of circumstances and effects very often, but is exactly what you need also to feed back the ex-ante regulation and to sort of make it evolve, which we know is a process that takes time, but it starts from the ex-post practice. So in theory, the combination of the two is absolutely great. And on top of that, I think we should not forget there are also other, as you mentioned, Pinar, instruments that you should use. So the Italian Competition Authority has this vital consumer protection division, and we had already cases that could be opened as, anti-competitive practices or unfair commercial practices. One in particular is a well-known one, and we, based on the circumstances, open as consumer protection, unfair commercial practices. So that's another instrument that you can use. In the digital world, we're using it to favor competition by creating trust in the internet, in new websites and so on, by tackling and nailing down unfair practices. On top of that, we have advocacy, which again is a feedback mechanism from practice to ex-ante. So I think it's a great time. Again, I've been appointed exactly at the right time, so let's see.
Thank you. I guess what will be key for the DMA is what you pointed out in terms of ex-ante regulation. We regulate ex-ante when we have years and years of experience with a certain practice, and we know 99% of the time it will be anti-competitive. But I suppose the DMA has erred more on the side of caution in terms of not risking the market to be distorted further. So perhaps it's favored time over experience with some of the practices, because some of the practices are relatively new, but I guess that's in the nature of digital markets too, so that's where the challenge lies. My last question to our speakers before I open it to debate is a slightly selfish one as an academic, because I'd like to think as an academic that the research we do as competition lawyers and economists is actually read by the competition authorities and somehow informs their thinking or their actions. Perhaps I'm being naive, but I do have two leading academics here who have then become members or heads of authorities. So I'm in good company to ask this question. And my last question to them will be, what are some of the competition law and economics topics on which you would like to see more academic research conducted as members of competition authorities? So what would benefit your work going forward to see more research on? Ioannis.
So I also think selfishly, and as a competition authority head, I would love to have research that could help us in the way actually we do our work and will save us time as well. So one of the issues, obviously, that comes to mind is the price signaling and invitation to collude area, obviously because of our new law. I mean, this really relates to the boundaries between coordinated conduct and unilateral conduct. Actually, this particular provision is based on the idea that this is about a unilateral conduct, so it's compatible with Article 3 of Regulation 1/2003. And I think this is an interesting area nowadays because of concentration first. I mean, markets become more and more concentrated. There is the issues here also how we can tackle two types of behavior, invitation to collude, so basically like an attempt to form a cartel. And secondly, announcements relating to communicating mainly future pricing intention for products or services between undertakings that are competitors. This is a classic public announcement type of issue that we have been facing in antitrust since many, many years. And the problem actually that it tries to solve is this idea that in the case law that we need to have, reciprocal reassurance for Article 101 or the national equivalent provisions to apply. And tacit collusion that is based on intelligent adaptation to the observed behavior of other firms is not caught by antitrust law unless there are reciprocal reassurances through some form of at least implicit two-way communication or other plus factors that will indicate coordination between the firms. And of course, this need for reciprocal reassurance results in the so-called oligopoly problem, where in oligopoly markets with sufficiently high market transparency, the firms may achieve market outcomes that are as socially harmful as those of a hardcore cartel, but competition law cannot reach it for lack of an agreement between the undertakings or collusion. And because oligopoly markets are in real life the norm rather than the exception, this formalistic approach may have substantial implications for social welfare. So, and this is something that I think is not just the Greek Competition Authority that's interested in. Right now, for instance, the FTC, US FTC, is thinking about revising their Section 5, or FTC Act guidance. So now, why I think it's important to look to these unilateral communication or disclosures of future pricing intentions. First, because it's sometimes impossible to determine whether a particular solicitation for forming a collusive scheme has or has not been accepted. Secondly, even an unaccepted solicitation may facilitate coordinated interaction by disclosing the solicitor's intentions or preferences. Third, the doctrine against unilateral disclosure solicitation serves as a useful deterrent against conduct that is potentially harmful and that serves no legitimate business purpose. And I would say even more interesting nowadays with algorithms, I think this enables actually this type of collusion in a way, or at least for firms to guess to a certain extent the next moves of their competitors without it being possible to prove the existence of reciprocal reassurances between undertakings. And similarly, there might not necessarily be sufficient structural links or connecting factors between the undertakings and the relevant market for the finding of collective dominance, or it might not be possible to prove an abuse like excessive pricing in the context of collective dominance because of the very difficult standards that we have. So it's an interesting area to do research upon, and I think this is not only of interest for the Greek authority, but also many other competition authorities around the world. The second thing is competition in ecosystems. I think we have now a little bit escaping this very simplistic idea that we saw in the literature also, that inter-ecosystem competition will solve the problem. I think this was very majestically put aside by the General Court in the Android case. I mean, when the court said that Android and Apple are not direct competitors. So there is actually now this focus on intra-ecosystem vertical competition, basically the relation between the orchestrator of the platform and the complementors. So and I think, this really raises the issue about, what is ecosystem power, how you actually determine it, how to take into account the non-linearity that we see in these digital markets. And I think, what are the triggers for competition intervention? So this is an interesting area to do research upon, in particular as ecosystems and cooperation, could be very beneficial as well for consumers. So it's a very tricky type of issue. Now, in our case in Greece, the authority, and the law commission that I had the honor to chair, suggested a provision on ecosystem, on abuse of ecosystem power. Actually, it was the first time that the concept of ecosystem was defined in a legal text. We tried that with the help of a number of good economists. But unfortunately, that did not move forward at the end by the legislator. There was a lot of opposition by some of the telecom industry, a little bit some members of the conservative defense bar, although it was supported by BEUC, the consumer associations in Greece, the Association of Small and Medium Undertakings, the Association of the Tourist Industry. But anyway, I think what is interesting and nice about this is like all this work wasn't for nothing, because the Commission's market definition notice now, the new one, will integrate a little bit more the concept of ecosystem. We actually have discussions now about application of Article 19A in Germany. as an ecosystem provision. And I think, we have been discussions about ecosystem in the context of the DMA negotiations. And even in Android, actually, we have now references about ecosystems. I think it's a concept that will probably stay in the future. And the third, the final issue I think will be very much interested to have more research on is sustainability and competition. I think this is a very important area which relates to the green transition of the economy. I think we have done work with the Dutch authority on evaluating sustainability benefits, how you quantify that, how you integrate that in your competition assessment. I think the sandbox, the sustainability sandbox that we're launching will provide the opportunity for having this type of trade-offs and assessments. I will not use only the term trade-off because it's not exactly a trade-off always, as a decision procedure. And I think this is really an area of great interest and will probably bring environmental economics and competition economics together. More or less, these are the three areas I would think would be quite interesting for future research.
Thank you, that's fantastic. And you have to make sure you don't do all of that research yourself because you continue to be so productive as an academic whilst at the authority. Elisabetta?
Yes, okay, so again, I obviously talk in my personal capacity. So I was an economic professor until 8 months ago, doing research, theory, and so on, and having the privilege and the honor to join the Italian Antitrust Authority. I think I've been able to see really how much research in economic, and I'm sure this is the same in the law field, matters. And it matters because very often we learn about issues once we have not yet open cases. And I think also the other way around, sometimes, I'm now sending emails to colleagues and say, you need to work on this. Because practice sometimes moves faster than research. So I will not mention, and I agree with what Ioannis has said on terms of sustainability, algorithms, detecting cartels. I'm very happy Joe Harrington is talking later. We have some experience on this, but will not mention this. In general, I think authorities need to have a direct, continuous communication. The Italian Antitrust Authority, I'm happy to say that we're running seminars with antitrust economists internationally renowned, Giacomo Calzolari, Massimo Motta, Chiara Fumagalli, all the Italian, and maybe in the future also, non-Italian ones, and they're coming to talk to us about, new issues, recommend their systems, acquisition of nascent competitors, and the latest. The one topic that caught my attention before joining, which was antitrust issues in the labor market, and which had not been discussed in research until, I think, very, very recently. I think it's fascinating. I am aware that not many people really know that we're talking here about not workers getting together, but we're talking about the other side, firms agreeing not to compete to attract workers, fixing wages or no poach agreements. It's something that was born in the US, because the US is where the issue of market power, raising market power that economists know very well, was first brought to the attention, and they had already lots of cases. In Europe, I recently heard that there are no cases, only one now open in Portugal. In Italy, this might be because we have a completely different industrial structure. We have small firms, 90%, I think, are small firms, so that monopsony market power may be absent. But I think it's very good that research is telling us, keep an eye on this. Maybe next year we will tell you that we have a case. The other thing is something that goes in the direction of us using data or us understanding data, not just in terms of algorithm, which is absolutely urgent, but also in terms of, I think, an issue that economists for a while thought was a second order, maybe it is, they will tell me, on personalized pricing. Personalized pricing in economics was for very often mainly a distributive issue. And then there were, awareness that price discrimination could be welfare enhancing. I worried that we may not know enough about the potential for personalized pricing to affect incentives to collude significantly. There is some research as well, to lead to exploitative practices. There is also some research, but it's not enough, and to be used to restrain, delay entry, so exclusionary. And we have instances, even in the country, where we see that some companies tackle what some economists recently would call captive consumers, those that entrants will target. And I think we need to understand better how they do it, how much they do it, what standard of proof we need, and how we can handle it.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Ms. Fernández, any thoughts on what sort of research might benefit your authority going forward?
Well, thank you very much. I would like to add to what Ioannis was saying in tacit collusion, the possibility of analyzing and studying in depth whether we have a particular tab in our competition law, which is conscious parallelism, whatever it is, which is a degree that is even less than a constructive practice. It may be tacit collusion plus, but I think in a world that we are going to be seeing with inflationary trends and more transparency, I'm afraid, because of restructuring of companies after a crisis situation, I think this is worthwhile giving a look, whether it is a tool that offers real possibilities. So there are some papers written on that, but not sufficient in my view, in order to create opinion, because that's another benefit that academics provide for societies, that you create opinion, and that is something that we really need. That's one thing. And then the second thing I wanted to say is that we would really welcome more impact assessments, more ex-post impact assessments, whether it is in merger control, what's the market after the merger, several years after the merger, whether the remedies imposed were working or not, whether the structure of the market was good or not. I think that's very useful for competition authorities. We can do that ourselves as well, but I think it would be even better if academics are doing it. And in particular for the advocacy area, in which, for example, we provide recommendations for changing in legislation, in proposed legislation, and we can see whether in the ex-post impact assessment, the situation of these recommendations being followed or not have made markets working better. And that's something that we are doing in our advocacy department. The problem is that it is very difficult to do that. I think we would need artificial intelligence techniques, and that's another area for academic study. How to use this artificial intelligence for detecting whether these recommendations have been implemented or not, and which have been the benefits for the market that this has provided. So assessing the impact of our enforcement, our advocacy practice, our merger enforcement, I think it would be extremely helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you, that's fantastic. And Fabienne?
First, I also want to reassure Pinar, even she is very tough with us, because I must say that academic research in competition field is incredibly rich, and it's sometimes frustrating for enforcers and for the judges. In real life, I'm a judge who would like to be able to spend more time reading all the works that come out every day around the world and which are of the utmost importance for us. As regards areas where academic input would be much needed, I can mention 4 fields: digital markets, of course, sustainability, impact evaluation, and totally agree with Cani on this point, and reflection on procedures. For digital market, I will only insist on one topic. This is the zero price market question. We know that now consumers are now offered products at a price of 0 on a daily basis. However, antitrust law is still centered on price theory, and a renewed conceptual basis would be therefore useful to help competition authorities consider quality dimensions and establish theories of harm based on considerations other than prices. As regards sustainability, I think everything has already been said, so I turn directly to impact evaluation. As competition enforcers, we must when the French and English word is quite the same, it's very difficult for me. We must constantly evaluate the impact of our action to make sure that our toolbox is still relevant and used adequately. But we have evaluation, I mentioned numbers, but this evaluation does not take into account the impact of the advisory role, for example, and we would first very warmly welcome any academic effort aimed at providing a more detailed and extended evaluation of our fingerprint on the economy. In light of the ongoing debate in France, I think elsewhere, regarding buying power, it could also be interesting to assess in a quantified manner the authorities' role in favor of consumers. And finally, reflection on procedures. Maybe as Elisabetta takes his professor casket or hat, I take my judge hat, and I would appreciate a study on the impact of certain types of procedures on our general enforcement action. In the antitrust area, settlements do exist in France under that we call negotiated procedures together with commitment proceedings. These negotiated procedures are quite limited in number as compared to the procedures where we litigate with the party and end up sanctioning them. To give you an idea, in 2020, we litigated 11 antitrust cases. We did 0 settlement, and we issued 3 commitment decisions. And in 2021, we litigated 14 antitrust cases. We did 4 settlements, and we issued 1 commitment decision. However, in the digital sphere, we are witnessing an increasing will from the parties to settle or to engage in commitment procedures. I gave you some examples a few minutes ago. Those are typically decisions that will less likely be appealed by the parties. But courts' decisions are fundamental to comfort our decisional practice, especially in cases where we pursued innovative or unprecedented approaches. This might prove problematic in a long run, as the idea of litigation is essential because it allows case law to develop and evolve. Furthermore, the importance of the deterrence effect of sanctioning and fining decisions should also be taken into account when assessing the opportunity of settling. So these are just a few suggestions, and I'm sure in any case that the imagination of researchers does not need to be stimulated. Thank you.
Thank you. There were some really fantastic ideas there. I hope everyone's taking notes, and I'm very pleased to hear that our research is actually taken on board. So the reason I terrorized the speakers with time was because I want to save time for questions. I know we're behind schedule, but we started 15 minutes late, so I think we can take the next 10 minutes for questions. And please make sure you ask questions, or otherwise I will have terrorized them for no reason. Paolo, please.
Please, you start. Good morning. I'm Lucio D'Amario from Linklaters. Of course, I would like to thank all the panelists for the very insightful presentations today. My question for all of them is around Article 22. We know there are different views. We know France has expressed views pretty clearly. Question is, shall we expect referrals when matters are below thresholds? And if so, is that the case also for traditional markets or not? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to actually collect some questions just so that we at least hear the questions.
First of all, I want Paolo Bucci-Rosiler. First of all, I want to thank you all for this fantastic discussion. It's very reassuring to know that competition law enforcement in Europe is in very good hands. So congratulations. My question is related to the enforcement against bid rigging. The Italian Competition Authority has been very active, and we understand that the Spanish Competition Authority considers this a priority. At the same time, in cartel cases in general, private enforcement is playing a very important role, but on the basis of my experience, this is not happening in public procurement bid rigging cases, at least in Italy. So I don't know whether the competition authority considers private enforcement as a threat or an opportunity, but I wonder whether you're considering doing some advocacy activity to foster private enforcement also in those cases.
Thank you. There's a question at the back.
Thank you. My name is Lianos. I'm a lawyer. Thank you also for the rich presentation. I would like to go back to the distinction, so the digital sector and the distinction between ex-ante, ex-post regulation. There seems to be indeed a consensus that there is a complementarity between the ex-ante, ex-post. However, the DMA and the ex-ante regulation is not only about setting the rules, it's also about sanctioning the implementation that is carried out by the gatekeepers or the companies concerned. So once the ex-ante obligation has been set and there is still some lack of clarity on the extent, the scope, the detail into which these obligations go into, then there is the implementation phase and the possibility, of course, that there are non-compliance proceedings and sanctioning. And my question is, isn't there an overlap and a risk of overlap of parallel application between the non-compliance procedure for the application of the ex-ante obligations and then the application of the regular antitrust rules, which even though they could be complementary, in the end they end up sanctioning more or less the same companies for behavior which is probably risk being the same. So how is this dealt with regard to the ne bis in idem principle, the proportionality and so on? Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps one final question. We have 4 speakers, so perhaps we can take 4 questions. Please.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to have heard that among the themes and topics for research, I'm a researcher, there is the effectiveness of remedies, which is it's a very strong boost of my self-esteem that I haven't got for like 2 years of research, so I'm very happy to have heard this. Relating to this, I wanted to ask, and I wanted to touch upon something that has been already mentioned, which is the use of sandboxes in competition law enforcement. We have precedents, let's say, in other authorities, such as the UK Data Protection Authorities or the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, that already use sandboxes. And I wanted to know the take of the other authorities represented today on this, whether you're already using these tools, and if you're not using them, whether you can consider using them in light of an arguably lack of effectiveness of remedies in digital market cases such as Google Shopping or Google Android, or also the US and the EU Microsoft cases, where I think at least that it is at least arguable that, whether remedies have been effective or not. So I wanted your take on the use of sandboxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have a question on Article 22 of the merger regulation, question on private enforcement, question of the risk of overlap between ex-ante regulation and enforcement of competition law, and a question on use of sandboxes. Ms. Fernández, since you're physically further away, would you like to take one of these to answer?
Okay, I would go for the public procurement one because in fact, we've been advocating as much as we've been able to for damages actions with the administration in cases of public procurement. And we've been successful in, for example, convince ADIF, who is the railway infrastructure operator, to pursue damages actions in cases of public procurement where we have fined producers of equipment for the railway infrastructure, and we know that they are proceeding with that. And we are trying to do so as much as possible in order to create awareness, because at the end of the day, these damages actions are in fact restorative for all taxpayers, so all consumers. So I don't want to take over the floor for every single other question. So Pinar, if you want me to proceed with others, I'm really happy to answer any of those, but I would leave also my panel fellows to answer other questions.
Thank you. Fabienne, would you like to take the Article 22 question?
Okay. As I've said, we were very happy, not only because of the European Commission change, but of course with the Illumina Grail judgment, of course. You know that we were the first authority to use I would say, the new possibility of referral of Article 22, because we thought it was really very useful for question. For example, we have a legal gap that could lead certain transactions not being reviewed by competition authorities when especially they involve an innovative nascent player or a company that has not monetized its invention. And that's why the Illumina Grail case requested by France, but not only by France, a number of other European Union and EFTA member states is so important. This is a case in point for the fate of innovation, as Illumina is a leading genomic sequencing company and the target of a biotech company that uses genomic sequencing and data science tools to produce toward early cancer detection. And I said this is a controversial question. I must remind you, for example, that in the United States, mergers are always on the edge, and years after mergers, you can destroy them. So I think, of course, it's a question of legal certainty or uncertainty, but the discussion is still beginning, and really, I think it is a very important tool, and I hope that we will use it more frequently. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisabetta and Ioannis, could I ask you to limit your responses to 2 minutes each,
Yes,
please?
I'll be very fast. Maybe I go very, very briefly through all of them. So to Luciano Damiano, so we have the new law, so we can now look at this directly. So let's see what happens. But we also have an economic seminar, so I expect we will be active. To Paolo Buccirossi, you know, in my previous position, I advocated a lot towards these qualification of public procurers. We have a law in Italy that's now been applied, it's been discussed again recently, and so which goes towards the idea of making public procurers, you know, having fewer of them and qualified. And I think you know, promoting private, always in my private capacity, I say what I say here. But I think will be good, because the private, it means that, you know, returning to the damaged parties. So whether we will do advocacy or not is something I cannot say, but I understand, and it's good to hear that the Spanish authorities doing this already. On the use of sandboxes, we have a fintech law. In these 80 decisions we take every week, and we analyze. There was one even recently. So there is we together with Bank of Italy, Consob, and other couple of regulators, we have to give our opinion on whether the sandbox can be constituted or not. Is there a risk of overlap between antitrust rule and DMA applications? Potentially, but that's why ECM Plus has been created with the idea of cooperating so as to avoid ne bis in idem and other issues. Again, as I said, if we are designated, we will make sure that doesn't happen. Yes.
Very quickly to Lucio, I think. Yes, I mean, we're very much in favor of Article 22. Actually, we joined the French authority in the Gremium Limina case. I think we're the first to join them. Or the second, I don't know. Oh, yeah, the Dutch were the first, I think. No, we're the second one. Oops. And obviously with Article 12 now, the DMA, the interplay will be to have a little bit more of that. Will that work also? I mean, it's obviously for innovative markets. Will that also work for traditional industries? Why not? I mean, we can think of situations of institutional capacity constraints that might lead to that, possibly. Secondly, the question of Paolo, private enforcement, this is extremely important. I mean, in Greece, we don't have much of private enforcement, unfortunately. So this is really something, as I mentioned before, we want to have this political economy perspective. This is really something we want to promote. We have been interacting a lot with consumer associations, with the training, competition training of consumer associations. We are now trying to think of how we can promote the creation of links between consumer associations and lawyers in a way to create like the plaintiff bar. I think that's very important. In some jurisdictions where that happened, think about Portugal, there are a number of follow-on cases, and I think they've been very successful in that. And one way probably to succeed there is to evaluate ourselves the consumer damage in our decisions. We'll try it in one of the following cartel cases that we have. It's going to demand more work from the authority, but actually we're planning to do it. Just also in order to create more incentives for settlement, because obviously, this will appear in the infringement decision. So, it's the choice of the firms is either you settle and you don't have this, either we have an infringement decision with evaluation of the consumer damage that's ready to go for follow-on case. So that probably will create more incentives for settlements. In terms of Giulio, a question about sandboxes. Obviously, we're very much in favor. That's why we have the sustainability sandbox. I think the idea is to be at the table before a competition structure and anti-competitive structure is created. This is very important, in particular in transition times, where new platforms are developed for the digital economy, the green economy, and therefore you need to be really there and avoid that the structure of the platform creates problems that it's avoiding having enforcement in the future by basically avoiding the problem at the first place. But we'll see how it works. I mean, we don't know in terms of the investment that we'll need from the authority staff to this. This is why at the beginning, we'll be only taking a few of these sandbox initiatives per year. There'll be different rounds. We'll select initiatives because it's a matter of institutional constraints. And we'll see how much investment we need to put on this to see if this is really worth it to expand it or not. But in a way, it's a different way of thinking about competition. It's not like the competition authority coming to enforce ex post, but actually to avoid the problem ex ante. And finally, about the Lilian's, if I hopefully it's the right name, Lilian's question about digital and ex ante ex post regulation. I fully agree with what was said before. I think the ECN Plus is there for this. I think it's very important that in case some of the countries use the possibility offered by Article 38 of the DMA to appoint national authorities. These are the national competition authorities, and it's actually the national general competition authorities. That's extremely important. This will sort out the ne bis in idem problem. I think the BPOS case law provides us a different perspective on ne bis in idem, which is that you can deal with these problems through procedural kind of cooperation and information of the regulator beforehand. So that's important to develop these networks of regulators and competition authorities and consultation. And I think it's also important that at the Commission level, I mean, and we're going to see the implementing regulation, the DG Com will be very much at the center of the DMA. I think that's also extremely important. I think DG Connect has done a great job. I mean, they have to deal with all the other acts, you know. So, I mean, they have a lot of stuff to do. I think for the DMA, I mean, the competition, the DG Comp should be at the driving seat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. And I'd like to bring this session to a close by expressing my heartfelt thanks to our speakers for not just putting up with my rude interventions, but also for sharing their genuinely very interesting and insightful perspectives with us. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our lovely chair. Very strict, but fair.
Exactly, very good questions. Thank you, Pinar.
Thank you, Ms. Fernández. Goodbye.
Thank you to you. Thank you.
Now it's time for coffee break.